Thank you. I think this weekend what you probably have is a lot of people saying the same things about leadership. We'll use our own words, we're all very different individuals and we all speak different, but it's very much the same principles. You will have different situations where you are a leader, but the principles really remain the same. And I believe it's about down to your behaviour first, how you treat people, how you respect people. You have to have your own values, your own integrity, courage for your vision, but also empathy for your team. And I absolutely agree that it's not about you particularly. You have to know your vision, you have to plan, and you certainly have to have the skills. But it's about how you interact with the team to bring them forward, and humility is a big part of that. I'm not an aggressive person, or else if it was about aggressing, I would never have got anywhere. I think I'm just going to quickly start by saying, leading the way at 40 Below, I have led teams of men and women in some of the most dangerous situations in the world. But I actually started off as a housewife, mother of triplets who worked at NatWest Bank. I had no outdoor experience. Most people have done all kinds of things by the time that they've reached 16, 17 and 18. I had never had a rucksack on my back until I was age 30. And I saw an advert in a newspaper asking for ordinary women to apply to become part of the first all-female team to walk to the North Pole. I came from an ordinary background. I was brought up on a council estate in Bradford, so I hadn't been brought up to believe I could do anything like that. And I just saw the advert and thought, well, why not? I'm ordinary. That's all they've asked for. That's about the only skill I had at that time. And I just had the courage to say, I'm going to have a go. Didn't really think I'd get on the team, but I'm going to have a go. And I did. I didn't have the skills. I was the worst person on the selection the first time. There was over 300 women applied. Thankfully for me, they did one selection weekend and then said everybody could come back, and we had 9 months to train and learn the things we needed to train and learn. I was really bad, and I knew I'd got three-year-olds to look after on my own, and I had to learn a lot of things. So I asked other people. I asked friends who were in the military to teach me. I didn't know what to do, and I just put myself in other people's hands, but I really worked hard for the vision. I went back down in 9 months' time, and I was chosen to be on the team. It was a relay of 5 teams of 4 women with 2 guides, and in 1997 we did a relay to the North Pole. I was chosen to be part of the first team, which was a great honour because it's the coldest part of expedition life at the beginning. It's the hardest, and they put their toughest girls in first. I thought I'd found what I was meant to do with my life. I could put up with the hardships. I found I could be part of a team. If I needed to lead, I could do that. And so from that team, 5 women, we didn't go the whole way to the pole, it was a relay. 5 women then put an expedition to walk to the South Pole. No British women's team had done it. And for the millennium, we left from the edge of Antarctica and walked over 700 miles, the windiest continent on Earth, and got to the South Pole successfully. I then began to lead teams, and it was whilst leading a team, I had a vision. No women's team had ever walked the whole way. We'd done the relay with new people coming in. No women's team had walked from land to the North Pole. More men had stepped on the moon than had walked to the North Pole the year that we did it. It was a huge task, and I believed that I could put the team to do it. So I asked my colleagues, Caroline Hamilton in the middle and Paul Oliver at the front, if they would join me. And at first they were really sceptical, because it is, I will talk about the expedition, it's one of the hardest journeys in the world, and there was a reason it hadn't been done by many men. And to put it in its context, since Everest was first the first man hit the summit of Everest. Over 5,500 summits have been made. Since 1903, when Peary first went to the North Pole to claim he went to the North Pole, only 68 teams have ever made it. So we were taking on a huge challenge, but it was a vision I believed in. And if I didn't believe in it, then how could I expect my team to believe in it? And eventually we talked about what we'd have to go through, the challenges, the difficulties, and finally, thankfully for me, Caroline and Pom agreed to join me on this extraordinary journey. The geographical North Pole, as opposed to the magnetic pole, the geographic North Pole is the top of the world. It's the axis. And it's in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. So you have to walk across a moving crust of ice. And whilst it's really, really difficult to walk across Antarctica, it doesn't move. With the North Pole, if you leave from Canada, the way the currents go is it pushes the ice towards the land. So that when you start off, and you start off just as winter finishes, when you start off, you are going over ridge after ridge of ice, and you're pulling 300-pound sledges. So the beginning of the expedition is absolutely the most difficult. As a leader, you have to plan, you have to work out what will go wrong, but even when you do that, sometimes things really go wrong. I'd been on the first leg of the 1997 journey, and I thought I knew what to expect. When we left, temperatures would be between minus 27 and minus 38 on the thermometer. It goes down to minus 40, minus 50 if you take in wind chill. The year we left, in 2002, we hit storms, and the temperatures for the first 27 days were between minus 38 and minus 52. We couldn't take wind because our anemometer just froze, but they roughly think it was down to minus 70 whilst we were moving. In those temperatures, nothing works. You freeze, your clothes freeze, your equipment freezes, but more frighteningly, your brain freezes. You can't think straight, you feel drunk all the time, and everything takes a humane effort. Picking a bag up to put it in the sledge, you just stagger and drop it in the sledge. And it's truly about survival rather than the goal. And you start to think about every day and every minute and just keeping on going. And when you're going through that, it takes away all those preconceived notions that you might have about yourself, that you might be a great leader, or you may have courage, or you've been brought up to go to the best schools. It takes you back to who you are as a basic human being, because you are surviving. And if you can, as a leader, you have to pull the group together. And it's not about what you can do for yourself, it's how you can help each other. And if every member of the team tries to help each other, then you can achieve far more than if each member of the team is just looking after number one. We had to watch each other. Our faces froze, our clothes froze, our hair froze. For the first 5 days, I took point at the beginning of at the front of the group, guiding the way through the difficult ice, because I'd got guiding experience. And when I say your brain freezes, there was one point I was at the front, and I suddenly went blind and I couldn't see anything, and I panicked. I can't see, everything's black, what am I going to do? And it took me a little while to realise that actually the frost had built up so much on my eyes that the weight of it had just closed my eyes. I just physically couldn't open my eyes. I wasn't blind, I just closed my eyes. And so I had to grab hold of my eyes, and I couldn't melt the ice because I had gloves on and they weren't warm, they were insulating, so I generally just broke off my eyelashes, and they were then gone, they couldn't ice anymore. It was difficult outside. When we got in the tent at night and we started cooking, the tent filled with steam, and we literally would just roll our sleeping bags up, sit on it with every muscle clenched. We couldn't speak to each other. Pom and I did the cooking across from each other, and we literally just grunted at each other. We were in a routine and dirty tea. We didn't speak. This is a self-portrait from here. That was it. That was our vision at night. It was thoroughly miserable. We ate our tea and then we had to climb into our sleeping bags. We used vapor barrier liners, but they didn't work in those temperatures. And the sleeping bags, after 3 or 4 days, had frozen so much it took us 20 minutes to break through the ice to get into the bag to try and sleep. Life was grim. All we had, 2 cookers, we had a mug each. That was my mug. I've still got it now. I was always melting it by the cooker. A mug each, a spoon, a pencil and a diary, and that was it. Because we were against it, we couldn't carry anything that wasn't for survival or that would not help us to get to the pole. That meant we didn't take toilet paper because that was too heavy. Wiping your backside with ice wedges at -70 is a whole experience I would not recommend. But it's amazing what you will do. When I say things went wrong, within the first 7 days, so much went wrong. On day 4, Pom, I felt more drunk than normal, and we weren't drinking. I looked at Pom, and I said, gosh, I feel horrible. And it was near the end of the night, and she collapsed in front of my eyes. And one of the biggest killers on mountains and in places like that is carbon monoxide poisoning. We'd got a tent designed for ventilations, but because of the cold, the ventilations had frozen. We couldn't see it because of the fog, and therefore she just collapsed. We had to drag her out, bring her round. We just put her in the tent, in the sleeping bag, and Caroline and I watched her every day. Pom I will talk about. She was the most heroic person I've ever met in my whole life. I asked her if she wanted to leave the team, because I also think you have to give people options. You can't make them keep suffering for the common cause. And she didn't. She was really brave and said, no, I want to see if I can get this poison out of my system, which she did. On day 5, we went to bed at night, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, all our world started to break apart. And I looked out of the tent, and where the tent, we'd put it on a flat piece of ice that was about 4 meters in thick, it just cracked. And just by the side of the tent, that piece of ice there, when we went to bed, was flat. It was a full flat pan of ice, and that rose and began to open up, so there was black ocean, and everything in the tent was breaking up. It was as if we were in an earthquake, and we were in danger of being taken down. And I think it's in those times when you're really against it that the strength of the team comes together. We'd thought about what would happen. We knew we were travelling on a moving ice crust. Everybody had their job. Everybody knew what to do in an emergency, and we had to trust each other. As a leader, I had to trust that everybody else knew their job. They had to trust that I knew my job. And it didn't even really become about one leader. It was about each member of the team being sure they knew what to do. Caroline went outside and stood on a ridge, didn't do anything to help. Her job was simply, and it was the hardest job she had, not to run in and grab things, to make sure when the last moment came and we had to get out or else we were going to be taken in. Pom was outside the tent, and I just literally threw everything at her as quick as I could, starting with the things we needed to survive, and she flung it in the sledge. And I had to trust them because I couldn't see anything inside the tent. Thankfully we made it out and we worked as a team, but it takes 3 people in those stages when the sledge is £300 to lift it over the ridges. So we also had to be fairly brave, take the sledge out and then move back. We got out and we began to ski, and we just stopped because I think when you've achieved small successes to your goal, it's really important to celebrate and to talk about it and to congratulate your team and each other. And we celebrated with anything we had. We just had an extra piece of chocolate each, but it was that recognition that, wow, we've done something good. We're nowhere near the pole and it doesn't look like we're going to get there, but gosh, that was it was great. As we skied along, the wind changed. We'd had no breakfast, we'd had carbon monoxide poisoning, the world was breaking up, it's day 6 by now, and suddenly we began to, so we said, we need to find somewhere to stop and put the tent again, have breakfast. The wind's, it's behaving oddly, and you do become quite in tune with nature. Within 5 minutes of trying to find somewhere to put the tent up, the whole wind picked up to such an extent we knew we were in trouble. We clipped the tent pom, that was our emergency routine, pom, with the thought that if it was clipped to somebody and their sledge, if the wind got it, it wouldn't be able to take it. Unfortunately, it was so bad, as we pulled the tent out of the bag, it caught the tent and dragged Pom across the ice and slammed her into a ridge and damaged her shoulder. All we could do was put the tent on the floor, climb underneath it, and we lay under that piece of tent material for 3 days with little food and little water being battered. Halfway through that 3 days, we had to send out, we had an emergency beacon that if we didn't send an emergency beacon within any 36-hour, it's just a black box that we flicked and it sent a signal to a satellite. If we didn't send one in any 36-hour period or make contact by sat phone, they would send a plane that we had paid for to try and find us at our last known position when the weather changed. And somebody had to get out of that covering. And I think that it was really important to take the responsibility and not to ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do. And so I got out and flicked the switch. It took me about an hour to get to the sledge, even though it was on the material, and get back in. And my body temperature reduced to such a level for the first time, I thought, if I don't do something, I am going to die here. And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't pull a sledge to get warm. I couldn't light a fire. And I thought, what have I got? And all I had was my mind. And I imagined a flame, and I imagined it, and I just got into a fetal position, and I thought about it, and I grew it, and I grew it, and I grew it. And eventually I felt some warmth. I turned in my bag, and I hadn't washed for goodness knows how many days. This awful smell came out. But it was the sweetest smell in the world, because where there's smell, there's warmth. Where there's warmth, there's life. So much so, I still like it if I've not had a wash for a while. Oh God, I'm alive. Oh, I do wash, but... All bad things, though, do come to an end. 3 days, the sun came out. We were so far behind schedule, everybody had written us off. So what do? You've got the best travelling day imaginable, and you're so far behind schedule, you really need to make up miles. Well, we just took the day off. We put the tent up, and we got in, we designed that tent, and we got in, and it was just important to regroup, to think about whether we wanted to carry on, to sort of nourish ourselves again, because as has been said, you have to be well fed and looked after, and to just talk to each other and stop sort of calm our hysteria down. And we did that, and it was worth it. And then we moved on and focused on each day. We had 2 more storms. You know, life is bad when the conversation in the tent, because you can't go out, is, oh God, do we pee in the cook pot before dinner or after dinner? Gonna have to use it again. Caroline had very bad frostbitten fingers at this stage. We'd gone through too much. Pom had really bad frostbitten feet. Caroline to such an extent that she couldn't do anything. We had to dress her. She couldn't even go to the loo on her own. Caroline and I became very close during those days. But you know, what she didn't do was think about what she couldn't do. There was no blame associated. None of us said, oh, have you got frostbite? How have you done this? Oh, you can't do that. It was always, well done for carrying on. And sincerely, we meant it. And she didn't think, oh, I'm useless, I can't do that. She didn't think about what she couldn't do. She thought about what she could do. And what she could do, concentrating on the positives, was she could pull a sledge. And so Pom and I, we were still 3 to a sledge. We would go from the back over the ridges and pull it from the back, and Caroline would pull from the front. We'd go back and get the next sledge and the next sledge. things got worse and worse. On day 37 of a trip that was going to last 70 days, so I know you're all great and you know it's more than half of the time, on day 37 we had gone 69 miles of the 500 miles we were supposed to go. Everybody had written us off. Our own sponsors had written a press release why we had failed. And we were falling apart physically, but we weren't falling apart mentally. And the reason we weren't is because we talked constantly, and we didn't believe necessarily by now we were going to make the pole, that we believed that we wanted to keep going, and that if we kept going we had a chance. Any chance was better than no chance, and we looked after each other. We particularly looked after, as we talked to each other, we looked after Pom. She had very bad frostbitten feet, and we would dress her feet on a night, and she would say, said to me once, "And if you want to give up, I'm very happy to do that because I can't help you anymore." At that stage I was the only one that didn't have frostbite, so I was taking on a lot of the jobs, and I sort of looked at her and said, "I don't want to give up, but I also want to take care of you, but you are helping me," because I would watch her put her boots on in a morning and she would weep with the pain and ski for 10 hours. And as I said to her, and I meant it, was, I don't know that I could do what you could do, but I know you would help me, and I know you could. It's easy to be able to help people. It's not always easy to ask for help. And just in case you're in any doubt as to the heroicness of Pom, she skied for 47 days on those feet to keep the expedition alive. But we knew we had a resupply, that actually to get to the pole, Pom would have to leave. I'll take it off. Pom would have to leave because we just couldn't extend the day, we couldn't push any further. But it was important for me that Pom took ownership of that decision. I would have had to have been strong, but I didn't want to have to say, you have to go. It was really important that Pom took ownership and made the decision herself. So we talked about it, and when the resupply plane came in and there was a doctor, and he said, if you don't leave, you actually will be casevac'd out and you will lose your toes. So Pom herself made the decision to leave. That left Caroline and I over 300 miles, less than 30 days, but we had a new motivation, and that was Pom. We wanted to do it for Pom, as well as all the people that had helped us and the people at home. And we used her gifts and the knowledge she had for the rest of the journey, even though she wasn't there. We would often say, what would Pom do? And so she was still important to the team, even though physically she wasn't with us. We had different problems when Pom left. As you get closer to the pole, where the summer's coming on, the spring, the ice is thinner because it's all wedged up to the land, so you start to get water. You start to get thin ice. We couldn't ski across the thin black ice, so we were constantly looking for ways around it. But when there's challenges, there are always some solutions, some paths. Sometimes it was working around, or sometimes it was finding an island and trying to jump onto it, and our sledges were much lighter now, and working away. And I would say to you as leaders is, look for more challenges in what you do rather than less, because it's the challenges that develop us, and it's the challenges that make something interesting. If it's completely easy and you've finished it, yes, you'll get a certain sense of achievement, but if you've had to work hard and you've overcome difficulties, that sense of achievement is so much precious. More precious. We had other problems. Polar bears roam open water. I have been stalked, not on this particular expedition, by this male bear for 5 days. Thankfully he didn't hurt me and I didn't hurt him. But again, we looked at solutions. Not for the polar bears, and I'm sure that would have frightened him. Open water was getting more and more of a problem as the ice disappears, and we now began to use an immersion suit. We were frightened of it at first. We didn't want to go in the water. So what we started to use it for was to go across thin ice. And sometimes you have to take a risk in order to achieve what you want. But this enabled us to take risks, because if we went in the water, we could cross thinner ice than we would without the suit. Because if we went in, the suit would keep us dry, And if you're dry, you will survive. If you get wet over that expanse of water, you will certainly die. Thankfully for me, Caroline's heavier than me, so whilst I always went across the water first, I felt that I had to take the risk. She's heavier, and she actually went in and tested the suit and swam towards me. I would say that was possibly one time when I didn't necessarily show great leadership. She went in, and I did shout first, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "What do I do?" I went, "Swim towards me, you idiot." At which point, oh, maybe not. But she did, and she came towards me. She was the first human icebreaker, got to the other side, and from that, it then gave us the ability and the confidence to use the suit whenever we came across open water. So we just got in, and then we began to just use it at all times. It was quick, so we didn't have to cross and find a long way around. And then we always thought of ways to improve things. So instead of pushing it across, quite often we'd then just jump on it and surf to the other side. We'd eaten most of everything. We used our sledges for everything. We used them for bridges. We were still very much behind time. It was about maths. How many miles in a day and how many days have we got left? And we didn't waste energy worrying about what was going wrong and the amount of open water. We just found solutions. We started to drink tepid water on a night, which was foul because we didn't have the time to boil water for hot chocolate because we weren't skiing, we weren't getting closer to the pole. So as a team, we were prepared to make sacrifices. Everything we had was concentrated on getting there. Our days were long. We still had expanses of open water that that was 1 kilometre in length, and it went miles and miles to our side. And we couldn't swim across that, it was too dangerous. So we still had areas that we couldn't deal with, and we just bit the bullet and went around. And it wasn't, I don't think, until the last day, and we were closing down on the pole, that we began to realise we were going to make it. The planes had set off already to pick us up. We knew we had 2 days. 2 days previously, because it takes them 2 days to get to us. And as we came up to the last ridge, we had 2 hours to get to the pole. We navigated by the sun and our watches or a simple compass, but to actually close down on the pole, it's a fixed point, but you're moving on ice all the time, even though you don't really have any concept of it. So at the end, you get your GPS out and you kind of close down on it. And as we went over the last ridge, very British, we did get the flag out, that's the picture. We went over, and this is an aerial photograph of what greeted us. That was like an ocean ahead of us, and the North Pole was in the middle of it. We'd got 2 hours, we knew we wouldn't get it. You can't say I've been 20 feet from the pole, it doesn't work. And we worked our way onto that little bit of island there, and we zigzagged, and we were beside ourselves because we didn't get there. And we stood there, and with an hour to go, and it's counting down, and then it was as if the Arctic had thrown everything at us. It had been cruel, it had been kind, but it's as if at the very end it gave it to us and went, okay. And we just stood in the same spot we'd stood at 10 minutes previously, and that island floated over the North Pole. Bang! We got it. We had it given to us, but we went through enough to get it. We put the flag up, we sang the national anthem at the top of our voices, not a word together, not a word in tune. We celebrated, Jerry Halliwell, eat your heart out, with whiskey, which did burn our throats. Beef potato soup, we didn't put the tent up because we knew we'd only got a little bit of time before the plane came. We were really lucky. The press really supported us. We were hit every national newspaper, but it always said, as it did today at the beginning, it always said, Anne Daniels and Caroline Hamilton, the first women in the world to go the whole way to the North and the South Pole. And actually, I never felt that. Paul may not have stood there physically, but if it hadn't have been for her sacrifices, we wouldn't have made it. So I would like to say, for the record, for you here, it was Anne Daniels, Paul Oliver and Caroline Hamilton that were the first women to go to the pole. Before I finish, I sort of got a bit more time. I want to talk to you about another expedition quickly that I was involved with, because that was leadership of one kind. You know, we were in it together, and it was very easy to be humble and to be part of a team. But there are different types of expedition, and in 2004, I guided. I guided a team of 5 men to the pole. I was their leader. It was actually 15 men, and there were 3 guides, and we each had our own 5 guys. They were captains of industry. There's Charles Dunstan, who is the CEO of Carphone Warehouse. There's Richard Ayres, who is the Director General of ITV. These guys are the top of their profession. And actually, the teams originally were 3 teams of 5 men who were going to be led by 3 famous, hardy, Arctic experienced Royal Marines, and that's what they were expecting. The day before they were due to leave, one of the Royal Marines had a family crisis and couldn't go, so one of them was a friend of mine and went, "Anne, you're the only person I'd ask, can you do it?" It was a 14-day trip, and I said, "Yeah, I can do that for you." So these poor guys, when I turned up, first you have to think about your credibility as a leader. When I turned up and they were expecting a hardy Royal Marine, can you imagine their faces when they got me? Literally their faces dropped. It was quite terrifying. And I had 2 choices then. I could either be really true to myself and carry on as the person I am, or try and live up and be a Royal Marine, and that would have never worked, because I would never have had the credibility. So I just stuck to my true values, spoke to them as I speak to you and as I speak to everybody. I knew it was absolutely imperative I was on top of my game, because they would judge me as a person and with skills. And so it was their trip. We were going the last degree to the North Pole. And it was about them achieving their dream. That's absolutely what it was about. I was helping them to achieve it. And so we had to plan and prepare, and it was really important. I got to know them, and I told them what to expect out there. It is terrifying. So I would explain the dangers, the thin ice that they may cross, that they may go through. But what was most important to me about that expedition is that they took ownership. At the beginning, obviously, they couldn't. It's a dangerous environment, but I could teach them about the different ice and about the navigating up there, and then eventually they would take the role of leaders themselves. Sometimes we worked on our own, groups of 5. We all stayed in phone contact, and sometimes we all got together and just worked together as a group, rather than we didn't want 3 groups that were competing to get to the pole first. We wanted each group to have a great experience, and we all had to respect, with 15 people, what everybody brought to that team. Some could cook, some could pull heavy sledges, some could navigate, and so the team was really worked on what they could bring. And gradually, as the time went on, we passed responsibility to the team as a whole. And so at the very end of the expedition, they helped each other. We started to stand back. And we did make it to the pole. We had a lot of problems. One guy damaged his leg. I will tell you that he had a problem. He had an injury and couldn't pull his sledge, and he had real difficulty asking for help, because he was a powerful man and had never asked for help. And as the leader of that team, I sort of spoke to him, because we wouldn't have got to the pole if he hadn't have given his sledge up. We just wouldn't have made it. And so I talked to him, and again it was about him having ownership of the decision. I would have made it, and I knew that, but so I spoke to him, and sort of as we were walking along, I said, "How do you feel about giving your weight up?" We'd had it. "I'm not giving my weight up, I'm not." And I said, "Okay." I said, "How would you feel if somebody on this team had an injury? It's not that they don't pull their sledge because they're lazy or they can't be bothered. They have an injury and they stopped you achieving your goal because they refused to acknowledge it." I said, "You don't have to answer any of these questions." He sort of looked at me and he went, "I know what you're doing, Anne, I know what you're doing." I said, "Well, just bear with me a minute." I said, "How would you feel," think about it this way, how would you feel if somebody had an injury and they asked for your help? How would that make you feel? And he said, oh, right, okay. And I said, you might want to think about, because he had a particular friend, about starting by giving weight to your friend, and just think about what I've said. And I left him all on his own, and I did whatever I was doing. By the time we got to our next break, he'd started to give some of his sledge away, and it was really uplifting for him. And by the time he'd finished, the whole team was carrying his whole sledge, and he was perfectly happy. And he came to me and he said, that was the most liberating thing I have ever done. I've never asked for help. And that made me feel amazing. We did get to the pool, and if you will notice, I actually am not on that picture because it was not about me. It was their dream, and I was very happy to take the picture to just stand out. So I'm going to finish there because time has gone on. If I can say anything to you, believe in yourself. You know, some boggy girl who's got 3 kids, never had a rucksack on her back, can, you know, lead teams at the top of the world. You can achieve many things. Believe in yourself. And the challenges you may have as women or young men, encourage them, embrace them, because they will make your life interesting. And as leaders, try and give rather than take, and you'll have a great and successful life.